Hi everyone, I welcome you all to my channel and I'm so glad you're watching. A warm welcome to my new viewers and new followers as well. Today, I'm going to tell you about the secrets hidden within Haiti. I promised you this in my video, The Legend of the Soul Protects. This man steals them. You can find the link in the description below. So, make yourself comfortable and enjoy the story. I would be very grateful for any like, subscribe, or share. I also want to apologize to you. Since I didn't have much time, I edited this video more like a podcast. So hopefully you'll forgive me this once. I've also divided the video into chapters so you can play the topic that interests you without having to listen to the whole thing and feel like you're in a history class. Once upon a time, there was an island called Hispaniola. It was inhabited by the Taino Indians. These were people similar to those we know from Central America. Unfortunately, Christopher Columbus arrived there in 1492, and the Spanish gradually enslaved Hispaniola, bringing various diseases like smallpox and measles, against which the local population had no immunity. Within a few decades, only a minimum survived. The Spanish didn't just wipe out the indigenous population with diseases, but also through hard labor. Initially, the Taino had to mine gold, mainly by panning from rivers, but they quickly moved to digging shafts. They had to work in inhumane conditions, often knee-deep in water or in narrow tunnels prone to cave-ins. The Spanish introduced the so-called encomienda system. It was a noble name for slavery. The Spanish king assigned the colonist a piece of land, along with the people living on it. The Taino had to mine gold for the colonist in exchange for protection and Christian teachings. In practice, it was a slow death by exhaustion. The Spaniards' disappointment came when there wasn't as much gold on the island as they had dreamed of. This was one of the reasons why they later moved to Mexico and Peru, to the Aztecs and Incas, where there was more gold. But they found the substitute for gold: sugarcane. Work thus shifted from the mines to endless plantations, where they began to massively bring in people from Africa, as the Taino were dying out. While the Spanish turned their eyes to the wealth of Mexico and Peru, the western part of Hispaniola remained somewhat abandoned. French pirates and settlers took advantage of this and began to settle here. In 1697, the island was officially divided. The Spanish kept the east, today's Dominican Republic, and the French gained the west, which they began to call Saint-Domingue. And it was here, under the French whip, that Haiti became the richest yet cruelest colony in the world. The French got to Haiti basically through pirates, buccaneers, based on the nearby island of Tortuga. They then began hunting wild pigs and cattle on the mainland until they settled there permanently. Under French administration, Haiti became the world's largest exporter of sugar and coffee. There was so much money that Haiti was called the Pearl of the Antilles. But that pearl was bought with unimaginable cruelty. The French issued a law that, while granting slaves a soul, also allowed owners to punish them brutally for any sign of resistance. The French also brought slaves there by the hundreds of thousands. The ships used the northeastern trade winds, which literally pushed them across the Atlantic straight into the embrace of the Caribbean. That journey took 6 to 12 weeks. It was called the Middle Passage, and it was the most horrific part, where people died in the cargo holds. Europeans, Portuguese, Dutch, English, and French, built forts on the African coast. In them, they waited for the cargo. They were afraid to go inland themselves because of tropical diseases which made them die like flies, and also because of powerful African kingdoms. African kings and chiefs sold their own people. Slavery existed in Africa long before the Europeans, mostly prisoners of war. But with the arrival of ships, it became a gigantic business. African states, such as Dahomey or Ashanti, waged wars with neighboring tribes just to capture prisoners, whom they then exchanged with Europeans. Europeans didn't pay for people with money, but with goods that were in demand in Africa: weapons and gunpowder. A chief who had weapons could better hunt other people and protect himself from competition. Alcohol, mainly rum and gin. Textiles and beads, luxury goods from Europe. Although African traders supplied most of them, kidnappings naturally occurred too. It was called panyaring. Arab and European traders occasionally raided villages near the coast. Conditions on the sugarcane and coffee plantations were so atrocious that mortality was huge. The average life expectancy of a slave after arriving in Haiti was a mere 7 to 10 years. It wasn't profitable for the French to let slaves start families. It was cheaper to work a worn-out person to death and buy a new one. This caused the majority of the population in Haiti to be people born in Africa, who remembered freedom and their gods. But with every new ship from Africa, not just labor arrived on the island, but also ancient traditions, faith, and gods. The French tried to break the slaves mentally as well, forcing them to accept Christianity and banning their own rituals. However, the Africans naturally didn't like the faith of their captors. They saw it only as a mask for cruelty and the whip. So the Africans began to play a dangerous game. Outwardly, they acted like humble Christians, went to church, and bowed to statues of saints. But in reality, they saw their own gods in them. Behind the image of Saint Peter, they saw Papalegba, the guardian of the crossroads. And behind the Virgin Mary, they saw Erzuli Freda, the goddess of love. At night, when the overseers slept, they would gather deep in the forests and mountains. By the light of fires and the rhythm of drums, they returned to their roots. The slaves were not a uniform group. They came from different regions. It was from this connection of various directions of African faith and enforced Christianity that Voodoo was born. It wasn't just a faith, but mainly a secret language of resistance, and the only space where slaves could be free for a moment. The kingdom of Dahomey, today's Benin and Togo. This is where the name Voodoo itself comes from. They brought the worship of the serpent god Damballa. The Congo region. This is where the Petwo rituals come from. These are more aggressive, faster, and emerged as a reaction to the cruelty of slavery. The Yoruba, Nigeria. They brought a complex system of deities, Orisha. Louis XIV issued the Code Noir, Black Code, which, among other things, mandated all slaves must be baptized as Catholics. African rituals are forbidden. Eventually, the French brought so many Africans to Haiti that the black population totally outnumbered the few remaining indigenous people and European masters. And that is exactly why the secret African religion spread throughout modern-day Haiti. And in the midst of this chaos, blood, and desire for revenge, one of the most prominent figures of the Haitian pantheon was born. A figure in a black tailcoat with a top hat on his head and a face resembling a skull, Baron Samedi. He is not just the god of death, he is the lord of cemeteries, but also the protector of children and the one who decides whether a slave's soul returns to Africa after death or remains trapped on the island. In West Africa, cults focused on death and cemeteries had existed for a long time. African slaves also brought voodoo with them. Voodoo was secret for a long time, banned under penalty of death. It only began to be spoken about publicly, along with the Baron, after the Haitian Revolution in 1804, when Haiti became a free state. Only then could people openly worship their spirits, and Baron Samedi became the official ruler of the cemeteries. People created him because they needed someone to protect them from premature death. Baron Samedi is the one who digs graves. Until he digs your grave, you cannot die. So people worshipped him to appease him, hoping he would leave their grave alone for a little longer. According to tradition, the spirit of the first man buried in a new cemetery becomes Baron Samedi. He thus becomes the owner of that place and the guardian of all the other dead. Also, no zombie can be created without Baron Samedi. A Bokor must go to the cemetery and bribe the Baron or ask for his permission to dig up and enslave the dead. If the Baron says no, the Bokor stands no chance. The Baron is a terrifying but just judge. He ensures that the dead remain in the ground and are not disturbed. He considers zombies to be something unnatural, stealing his subjects. That's why Bokors fear him and must bring him sacrifices, a black rooster, rum, or tobacco, so he closes his eyes. Baron Samedi uses very foul language, loves black humor, and constantly jokes about things that make us uncomfortable. In the Voodoo tradition, Baron Samedi is considered the ultimate protector of children. There is a very logical yet touching reason for this. The Baron believes that every child should have the chance to live their life to the fullest before they end up with him in the cemetery. Refusal of the grave. If a child is very sick or facing death, people pray to the Baron. It is believed that if the Baron refuses to dig the grave, the child simply cannot die. Death will not accept them at that moment. Even though he looks terrifying, in these cases he acts as a powerful healer. The Baron does not like children being harmed. It is said he is very cruel to those who want to hurt the innocent, and in such cases his black humor turns into cold rage. The name Samedi means Saturday in French. Voodoo tradition says that Saturday belongs to the dead, so Baron Saturday is actually an official who is in charge of the cemetery gates on the weekend. But Baron Samedi is not alone in the cemetery. By his side stands his wife, Maman Brigitte. She is completely unique. While other spirits come from Africa, Brigitte has Celtic roots. She is a reminder of a forgotten history. Her figure emerged from the blending of African traditions with Irish and Scottish women who ended up in Haiti as convicts. That is why Brigitte is a white woman with red hair and a green dress. If the Baron is rough, Brigitte is even tougher. She is the one who keeps the Baron in check. She also loves rum infused with chili peppers and is so powerful that she rubs it on her intimate areas to prove her power. She guards graves, especially women's graves. She punishes the desecration of a cemetery instantly. She dances the wild banda dance, and her vocabulary would shame a sailor. And just as Baron Samedi becomes the spirit of the first man buried in a new cemetery, Maman Brigitte is the spirit of the first buried woman. What do you find on her altar when people ask for her protection or healing? They bring her purple flowers and pieces of silk, cloves and pepper for her fiery nature, mirrors which symbolize the gateway between worlds. And now we move to voodoo itself. It is an incredibly fascinating topic, which is often distorted by horror movies in our pop culture. In reality, it is a deep and complex religion with a rich history. Essentially, voodoo originated as a form of spiritual resistance. The rituals are built on rhythm and drums, and it is believed that their sound summons spirits who can then enter the bodies of the dancers. But to make sense of it, we need to talk about the Haitian mountains. Haiti is a very mountainous island. While the French controlled the coast and the fertile plains with plantations, the interior and the high mountains were deadly for them. There was scorching heat, tropical diseases, and terrain where an army in heavy uniforms would immediately drown. It was precisely in these mountains that the Maroons lived. These were refugees from the plantations who established free settlements here. They lived much like they did in Africa, in tribes, freely, and according to their own rules. In these communities, various African traditions blended, and because people were constantly afraid that the French would find them or that someone would betray them, they had to have very strict laws and strong leaders. Voodoo, as I said, originated as a spiritual self-defense and the only path to survival. And it is definitely not about cursing enemies. That is more of a movie myth. In reality, it's about maintaining balance between the world of the living and the dead. Priests, called Ungan, and priestesses, called Mambo, functioned as both doctors and psychologists of the community. They used herbs, ritual dances, and trance for healing. People turned to the spirits with requests for family protection, for harvest, or for good luck in life. Voodoo believes that our ancestors are still with us and can guide us. Death here is not the end, but merely a transition to another state. However, there are also darker branches where Voodoo is used to punish those who broke the laws of the community. This is where the legends of zombies come from, people who were punished by losing their own free will. And what does a real Voodoo altar actually look like? It's not just one table. It's more of a colorful chaos that, however, has its strict order. Every object has its purpose. There are veves, intricate symbols drawn with flour or ash directly on the ground. Every spirit has its own symbol, and Baron Samedi has a cross on a pedestal that resembles a tombstone. The colors of Baron Samedi and his family are mainly black, purple, and white. Offerings must not be missing on the altar, because spirits have human tastes. A bottle of rum with hot peppers, black cigars, strong black coffee, but also sweets. Mirrors also frequently appear here, but they are usually turned to the wall or covered. It is believed that they are gateways to the world of the dead, and if they remained open, someone whom the Baron doesn't want out could escape. Did you know that in the Voodoo tradition, it is believed that no one can die until Baron Samedi digs their grave? If someone appeases him with the right ritual, the Baron can refuse to dig, and the person will survive even the worst illness. He is indeed the spirit of death, but at the same time, the ultimate protector of life. And how is it with zombies? This whole terrifying story began the moment the Bokors appeared on the scene. It was precisely in the refugee settlements in the mountains that the harshest form of voodoo began to take shape. People here needed someone to protect their communities not only with weapons, but also with magic and fear. While regular priests healed and maintained faith, over time a group of people emerged who came to be called Bokors. The Maroons, escaped slaves, feared betrayal above all else. If someone revealed to the slave owners where they were hiding, it would mean death for everyone. The Bokor was the one tasked with punishing such a traitor, and in their eyes there was no worse punishment than putting a person to sleep using poison, having them buried, and then turning them into a zombie, an eternal slave without their own will. It was the most terrible warning for anyone who would threaten freedom in the mountains. The Bokor thus became a secret judge and executioner in one person. In the context of voodoo, however, a Bokor is something different from a classic tribal shaman. While a shaman usually cares for the welfare of the entire tribe, a Bokor is a figure who inspires much more fear. He is a priest who, as they say, serves with both hands. This means he commands both white and black magic. He is a magical mercenary who can hire spirits for dark purposes and cast a curse for money. Bokors were often members of secret societies that maintained order in Haiti through force and fear where the state failed. When the law or the state which enslaves you cannot protect you, you turn to someone who has power even over death. But as it happens, absolute power corrupts people, and that, unfortunately, was the case for many Bokors. Over time, they began to abuse voodoo rituals just to break human will and strengthen their influence. For the community, they became both a blessing and a curse. They were the ones who could punish a traitor, but at the same time, everyone feared them because their terrifying services were up for sale to anyone. Now that we know who the Bokors are, we can finally tell the truth about zombies. First, we will analyze what people in Haiti believe, and then we will look at how the whole thing probably works in reality. According to legend, a zombie is a person whose soul was stolen by a Bokor sorcerer. The body then remains as an empty shell that must obey the sorcerer implicitly. But what does such a ritual actually look like? We don't know. Bokors perform their rituals in complete secrecy in the middle of the night. But it is said that the Bokor first picks his victim. Often it is that very traitor to the community who needs to be punished. It all starts at the victim's door. Tradition says that the Bokor comes to the house at night, presses his lips to the crack in the door, and sucks out the victim's soul. Then he calls the person by name. If the victim answers or just makes a sound in their half-sleep, their soul is definitively trapped in a special jar called a galipe. The person subsequently falls gravely ill and lapses into a state indistinguishable from death. The crying family then buries him, and to the outside world, the person is dead. But the story doesn't end here. The Bokor must go to the cemetery at night and ask Baron Samedi for permission. If the Baron consents, he releases the dead back into the world of the living, but without their own free will. The Bokor digs up the body, calls it by name again, and gives it a special potion to drink, often made from datura. This turns the person into a zombie cadaver, a body without a soul that mechanically carries out its master's orders. For Haitians, however, a zombie was not terrifying because it would bite someone, as we know from movies. The real terror stemmed from the fact that a person became an eternal slave. After death, their soul could not return to the spiritual home in Africa, but had to work on a plantation forever. It was actually a cruel metaphor for their own history of slavery. This is also related to the fascinating ban on salting. It is said that Bokors give their zombies food completely without taste and without a pinch of salt. It is the only way to keep them in that numb, obedient state. It is believed that if a zombie tastes salt, its senses immediately reset. Salt restores its consciousness, it realizes its state and immediately rebels, or in shock, tries to run back to the grave to finally find peace there. The fear of a relative becoming a zombie was so immense in Haiti that families did incredible things. They often sat by the grave for several days and nights until the body began to show signs of decomposition, because they believed that a Bokor could no longer use spoiled meat. Sometimes, just to be sure, they drove a stake through the body in the coffin or slit its throat. The mouths of the dead were also sewn shut with thread, so they couldn't answer when the Bokor called them. Thousands of tiny seeds were placed in the coffins because it was believed that a zombie must count them all first before it can climb out. And by the time it could manage it, the sun would rise and the spell would break. Clairvius Narcisse. This is the most famous real case. He was declared dead in 1962, and 18 years later suddenly appeared in his native village. He claimed he had been a zombie slave on a plantation the entire time. Doctors who later examined him, such as anthropologist Wade Davis, explained it rather by the fact that these people were under the constant influence of drugs from datura, which is called the zombie cucumber in Haiti. The case of Felicia Felix Mentor, 1936, a woman appeared on a road in Haiti who looked like an old woman and claimed to be Felicia, who had died back in 1907. Her family actually recognized her by her scars and markings. She was in a terrible state, didn't speak, just rocked, and was unable to bear sunlight. Anthropologists examined her at the time and concluded that she was a victim of zombification, which had trapped her in a numb state for decades. The case of Francina, 1976, a woman who was officially buried, there was even a stone slab on the coffin to prevent anyone from digging her up. A few years later, she was found at a market in another town. She was recognized by her mother and local people. Francina was alive, but her brain was so damaged by the powder that she was never the same again. And now we take it from the scientific side. Scientists found out that the bokor made a fine mixture containing tetrodotoxin from the pufferfish. And how did the bokor get the poison into the victim? He used incredibly sophisticated methods. The most common was powder on the doorstep. At night, he sprinkled it on the doorstep or into the victim's shoes. The poison was absorbed through the skin on the soles of the feet. Other times, he approached the victim in a crowd and during an argument blew the powder directly into their face, where it entered the blood instantly through the mucous membranes. There were also cases where a small amount of poison was added directly to food or drink. A real horror then begins to unfold in the victim's body. First, you feel a tingling in your lips and fingers. Then your muscles begin to stiffen. A state of apparent death occurs. The poison blocks nerve impulses, and the heart slows down so much that a regular doctor won't hear it. Breathing is imperceptible. The body cools. But the most terrifying thing? Consciousness remains. The victim is conscious the whole time. They hear their family crying, feel them being washed, being placed in the coffin, and the first soil falling onto the lid. They cannot move an eyebrow, cannot cry out. They just wait in the darkness of the grave. Here the story continues at the cemetery. The bokor digs up the body and gives it a special potion made from datura to drink. Datura causes total disorientation, memory loss, and extreme compliance. The person is then essentially in an endless numbness, not knowing who they are, and just mechanically following their master's orders. You might find it paradoxical that the bokor went to ask Baron Samedi for permission when he himself knew he was using chemistry. But for him, it wasn't a deception. Bokors truly believed that the poison was just a tool from the spirits. Moreover, the ritual at the cemetery was essential for the victim's psychology. For a zombie to work, it had to believe it was dead. When the person woke up from the drugs and saw the bokor worshipping the Baron, their own brain convinced them, "I really am dead. He really took my soul." So that was something about zombies. It is certainly worth mentioning how a revolution broke out in Haiti that shocked the whole world. One would expect that the revolution would put an end to bokors and zombies, but the opposite was true. You might wonder how a group of exhausted slaves could defeat the strongest armies of the world at that time. The Haitian Revolution was not just an ordinary rebellion, it was a brutal conflict that changed history forever. It was the only case in history where enslaved people not only overthrew their masters, but also managed to establish their own state. It all began on the night of August 14th, 1791, in a forest called Bois Caïman. There, during a storm with thunder and lightning, representatives of the slaves met under the leadership of a Voodoo priest named Dati Boukman. It wasn't just a secret meeting, it was a massive ritual. Tradition has it that they swore allegiance to the fight for freedom there, and voodoo became their strongest weapon at that moment. This ritual gave the slaves a sense of invulnerability. They believed the Loa spirits would protect them from French bullets. Just a few days later, hell broke loose, and in a single night, hundreds of plantations went up in flames. If Boukman was the one who lit the match, then Toussaint Louverture was the one who created a real army out of the chaos. He was an educated former slave who was nicknamed the Black Napoleon. He accomplished an incredible thing. He trained an army so well that they defeated not only the French colonists, but also British and Spanish forces. However, when the real Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in France, he decided that Haiti must be tamed again. He sent a massive fleet and thousands of elite soldiers there. But the French ran into something they didn't expect. In addition to the resilient Haitian fighters, yellow fever began to mow them down. Soldiers died by the thousands. Even though the French captured Toussaint Louverture by trickery, who later died in a French prison, they could no longer stop the revolution. Leadership was taken over by General Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Toussaint's right hand. But he was no longer a diplomat. His motto was, "Cut off heads, burn down houses." It was total war. In 1803, at the Battle of Vertières, he definitively defeated the remnants of the French forces. Napoleon lost over 50,000 soldiers in Haiti, which was a greater loss than he later suffered at Waterloo. On January 1, 1804, Dessalines declared independence and returned the country's original indigenous name, Haiti, Haiti. It was a bloody revenge for centuries of suffering. One would think that by expelling the slave owners, everything ended, but it didn't. In remote villages and mountains, people continued to follow their traditions. After the departure of the French, a power vacuum emerged, filled by bokors and secret societies. They became the unofficial police and judges. If someone harmed the community, the bokor punished them in his own way, by zombification. This harsh system of justice became so strong that the figure of the zombie even made its way into the Haitian penal code. The state thus essentially officially recognized that it was happening. About 30 years later, a law was created where Article 249 directly stated that if you drug someone with a substance that causes a state of apparent death and then bury them, it is treated as attempted murder. And if you then dig them up and enslave them, it is treated as murder, even though the person is technically still breathing and walking. Although Haiti is a modern state today, the belief in bokors still survives in remote areas. The revolution in 1804 brought freedom but did not banish fear from the depths of the human soul. Zombies and the power of bokors remained in Haiti like invisible chains that bound people further, not by the whip of foreigners, but by their own faith and fear. The figure of the zombie thus survived centuries and reminds us to this day that the most terrible prison is the one in which a person loses their own free will. This is precisely the moment when the victorious story of freedom turned into quite a chaos. Post-revolution, Haiti was not just about tribes, but about trying to create a modern state, which, however, several times devolved into absurd regimes. And what did it look like there, right after 1804? First, there was the empire. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the same general who won the war, had himself proclaimed emperor in 1804 as Jacques I. He wanted absolute power to defend the country if the French returned. However, he was incredibly cruel, not only to whites but also to his own people. In 1806, his own comrades in arms took his life. After that, Haiti was divided into a kingdom and a republic. Following the emperor's death, Haiti broke apart into two pieces because his successors could not agree. It was a bizarre period. The north, led by Henri Christophe, an African. He proclaimed himself King Henri I. He had an incredible fortress built, the Citadelle La Ferrière. It still stands today and is the largest fortress in the Americas. Christophe was obsessed with order. He created his own nobility, appointed dukes and counts, and forced people to keep working hard in the fields so the state wouldn't go bankrupt. The South, governed here by Alexandre Pétion, a mulatto. He tried a more democratic approach, distributing land to former slaves, which made him a darling of the people, but economically weakened the country because the large plantations that made money disappeared. Then came the unification and exchange slavery. Around 1820, Haiti united again into one republic, but a huge betrayal came from France. The French sent warships to the coast and sent a message: either you pay us 150 million francs as compensation for lost plantations and slaves, or we will attack you again. Haiti, to have peace, agreed. But by doing so, the country went totally into debt for the next 122 years. Money that should have gone to schools or hospitals flowed to France. Haiti was free politically, but financially it became a slave again. The debts were managed to be paid off only in 1947. And what about the tribes in the mountains? While presidents, emperors, and kings took turns in the capital, Port-au-Prince, the people in the mountains, descendants of the Maroons, basically didn't care about the government at all. They lived in their communities. It was there that bokors and secret societies continued to rule. For an ordinary villager, the king was not the one in the palace, but the one who could help him with the harvest, or curse him, the voodoo priest. Haiti simply became a playground for generals playing kings and emperors right after the revolution, while the rest of the world, including the US, ignored and blockaded the island because they were afraid their own slaves might be inspired. Haiti was politically the most unstable country in the world. Presidents changed as if on a conveyor belt. Hardly any finished their term of office. Mostly their own people took their lives, or they had to flee into exile. Add to that the insane repayments to France, which totally drained Haiti. The country was free, but incredibly poor. From 1915 to 1934, Americans feared chaos in their backyard, and so they occupied Haiti for almost 20 years. For Haitians, it was a huge humiliation. Again, they were ruled by white men with weapons. But the occupation triggered a massive wave of nationalism and a return to roots among the people. It was precisely then that the Haitian elite began to proudly elevate voodoo and African heritage as resistance against American culture. Then came the search for a black savior. Haitians never accepted the Americans dictating to them. Armed clashes occurred, led by the so-called Cacos. The leader of the Cacos was Charlemagne Péralte. Although the Americans crushed them militarily, the guerrilla war in the mountains was exhausting and expensive. Unfortunately, in 1919, Péralte was betrayed by one of his people. Two American Marines in disguise, they smeared their faces to look black, sneaked into his camp and shot him at close range. The Americans then transported his body to the city of Cap-Haïtien, where they pinned it to a door and exposed it to the sun for everyone to see that he was finished. But they made a mistake, and for Haitians, Péralte immediately became a religious symbol and a martyr. And why did the Americans leave in 1934? The massacre in Les Cayes, 1929. This was the turning point. American Marines opened fire on a crowd of demonstrating Haitians, mostly students and farmers, protesting the economic situation. They killed over 10 people. News of this massacre went around the world and caused huge outrage even within the US itself. Public opinion turned against the occupation. In 1929, the Great Depression hit the world. The US suddenly had completely different worries than subsidizing the administration of an island in the Caribbean. Maintaining thousands of soldiers and officials there was too costly. President Herbert Hoover, and after him Franklin D. Roosevelt, introduced a new strategy, the Good Neighbor policy. They realized that militarily occupying neighboring countries only made enemies for them in Latin America. They decided it would be better to rule economically and politically from behind the scenes rather than with bayonets. After the Americans left, talk began in the country that Haiti must be ruled by someone who represents the black majority, not just that wealthy, lighter elite from the cities. Someone who comes from the people was being sought. And that's when an inconspicuous doctor appeared on the scene, whom people called Papa Doc. François Duvalier was born on April 14, 1907. Originally, he was a very educated man. He studied medicine and in 1943 became a key figure in the fight against tropical diseases, mainly yaws, Frambesia. Because he traveled around the countryside, treated poor people and talked to them, he gained their immense trust. That was when his nickname, Papa Doc, originated. He acted like a kind father of the nation. He exploited black nationalism. Haiti was divided between the mulatto elite, wealthy, educated people, and the black majority. Duvalier positioned himself as the protector of blacks against that noble elite. The elections in 1957 decided it. After a period of chaos and several governments, Papa Doc won the presidential election. He promised an end to corruption and help for the poor. People believed him because they knew him as that good doctor. He spoke very quietly, monotonously, and nasally, because that is exactly how the spirits of the dead speak. He wore a black top hat and a black suit. People saw in him the embodiment of Baron Samedi. Papa Doc once had an argument with U.S. President John F. Kennedy. He then publicly declared that he had placed a voodoo curse on Kennedy. And when Kennedy was shot a few weeks later in Dallas, Papa Doc used it as proof of his supernatural power. He claimed he had arranged it using magical rituals and sticking needles into a wax figure. But it didn't take long for Papa Doc to turn into a monster. He immediately began purging the army and offices of anyone who wasn't 100% loyal to him. He created the Tonton Macoute. Because he didn't trust the army, he set up his own militia, those zombie soldiers in dark sunglasses. They didn't take a salary. They could steal and kill as they pleased as long as they served him. It was believed that they stole naughty children, put them in a sack, and then ate them. Duvalier knew that the fear of magic is more powerful than the fear of weapons. He abused voodoo, styled himself after Baron Samedi, and people believed he had supernatural power. In 1964, he had the constitution changed and declared himself president for life. From that moment on, his power was absolute. When his political rival died, Duvalier had his head stolen from the grave. Supposedly, he then used it in his private rituals in the presidential palace to suck out the wisdom and strength of his enemy. As a doctor, he started a blood plasma business in Haiti. Poor people sold him blood for a pittance, and he then sold it dearly to the US. It was said he was literally sucking the life out of them to maintain his power and money. He died in 1971, and power was taken over by his son, Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, who continued the reign of terror until they expelled him in 1886. Famine broke out in Haiti, and people had had enough of how the dictatorial family drowned in luxury while people starved to death. Huge protests began, and the army eventually refused to stand against the people. The Americans, Ronald Reagan's administration, who had previously tolerated Duvalier as a bulwark against communism, finally told Baby Doc it was time to go. They provided him with an American plane, and he, along with his family and millions of dollars in suitcases, fled into exile in France. While his father and he made thousands of people disappear or die of hunger, Baby Doc lived out his life in luxury on the French Riviera. He did return to Haiti in 2011, but instead of facing court in handcuffs, he quietly died of a heart attack there a few years later. No prison, no punishment, just a lavish life with money he stole from one of the poorest nations in the world. People understood they had been deceived and took decisive steps to correct their mistake. Haitians had perceived voodoo as their identity since the days of slavery. For them, Baron Samedi was not Papa Doc. The Baron was a spirit who was here centuries before him. Duvalier was just a man for them who put on a mask to rule them. So when he fell, people didn't reject the Baron, but rejected the monster posing as him. As soon as Baby Doc flew into exile in France, a movement called Dechukai, translated as uprooting, broke out in Haiti. People began destroying everything that recalled the Duvalier family. They even went so far as to storm Papa Doc's family tomb, wanting to ritually destroy his body to make sure he wouldn't return as a spirit. But they found only an empty coffin. Baby Doc supposedly had his father's body secretly moved earlier, so people wouldn't tear it apart. The members of the Tonton Macoute fared the worst. Because people believed they were evil spirits or zombies in human skin, they began hunting and lynching them after the fall of the regime. It was a way to get rid of the fear that those black sunglasses and machetes had induced for decades. After Baby Doc's flight, Voodoo was finally recognized as a regular religion in the new constitution. They no longer had to hide behind Catholic saints. Baron Samedi returned back to the cemeteries as the one who guards the peace of the dead, and stopped being a political boogeyman in the presidential palace. And how is Haiti doing today? The 2010 earthquake, that was total destruction. Over 200,000 people died, and the capital Port-au-Prince was in ruins. State administration essentially ceased to exist. Since then, Haiti has been trying in vain to emerge from the debris. But instead of peaceful recovery, more and more blows keep coming. The island lies in the main path of Caribbean hurricanes, which regularly devastate what people manage to repair. In 2016, the destructive Hurricane Matthew swept through, and in 2021, another powerful earthquake hit. Nature seems to not give Haiti even a second to catch its breath. In July 2021, President Jovenel Moïse was killed directly in his residence by a group of foreign mercenaries. To this day, it is not known exactly who was behind it. Since then, Haiti has not had an elected president or a functional parliament. Because the state doesn't function, gangs took over power. They control over 80% of the capital. The most famous gang leader is named Jimmy Cherizier, but everyone calls him Barbecue. By a twist of fate, gangs today use similar methods to what the Tonton Macoute once did. They spread fear, extort, and control food and water supplies. They are thousands of armed young men who don't look left or right. Kidnappings of foreigners are a daily occurrence there. When someone from another country arrives, a journalist, a humanitarian worker, they are basically a walking ATM for the gangs. That's also why almost no one dares to go there. Voodoo has been officially recognized in Haiti since 1987 as one of the state religions on the same level as Catholicism. No one has to hide behind it anymore. For ordinary people, it is still the main force that gives them hope when the state fails. Priests and priestesses are often the only ones keeping up at least some morality and aid in the slums. While gangs rage in the cities, communities that have closed themselves off from the world live in the mountains and remote villages. These are the descendants of those Maroons I told you about. A foreigner is an intruder there. They have their own patrols and a system of unofficial news. Before you even manage to reach the village, the whole community knows about you. If someone comes there uninvited or without being accompanied by a local, they risk running into a very hostile reception. People there believe that foreigners bring them only disease and misfortune, which history unfortunately has confirmed for them. For people from the outside, especially from the US or Europe, Haiti is terrifying because of that omnipresent magic. People are afraid not only of a bullet, but also of someone casting a curse on them. For a rationally thinking person from the West, the atmosphere of the Haitian countryside, where you see voodoo altars on every corner and hear drums, is psychologically incredibly demanding. That fear of the unknown is palpable there. Today, Haiti is in international isolation. Other states don't want to send their soldiers there because past UN missions ended in disaster and the introduction of cholera, so Haiti has to manage on its own. This only deepens that state of a state within a state. Haiti today, after hundreds of years, has returned to where it began. While cities are ruled by chaos and violence, in the mountains people have once again closed themselves into their tribal communities. For the rest of the world, Haiti is a dangerous zone where even the bravest armies do not dare to go. It is an island that has decided to live its own way, in the shadow of its gods and its own laws, which no one from the outside can understand. Well, and that is all from me for today. I hope you liked my story. Be sure to write to me in the comments what you think about it. I love to read it. And don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss the next video. As I said at the beginning, I will be grateful for every like, subscribe, and share. And if you would like to support me even more, you can buy me a coffee on Buy Me a Coffee. You can find the link in the description. I bid you goodbye for today. Thank you for watching, and see you. And at the very end, a thematic joke. No, there won't be any joke. It would be unethical towards Haiti. But so as not to cheat you, I'll give you something better here. Something you can try as a bit of Haitian magic. In Haiti, there is a legendary pumpkin soup called soup joumou, and it serves as a symbol of prohibition. During the days of French rule, that cruel time we spoke about during the import of slaves, slaves were not allowed to eat pumpkin soup. It was considered too much of a delicacy, which only white masters were allowed to indulge in. Symbol of revolution. When Haiti declared independence in 1804, the first thing the liberated people did was cook huge cauldrons of pumpkin soup. Tradition. To this day, Haitians always eat it on January 1st to celebrate their independence. It is like their national ritual. Ingredients: beef, chuck, shank, or neck, cut into cubes. Pumpkin, preferably Hokkaido. In Haiti, they use calabaza squash, but Hokkaido is a great substitute. Vegetables: potatoes, carrots, a piece of cabbage, onion. Pasta, a bit of short macaroni or noodles. Lime juice. This is typical for Haiti. The meat is marinated in it first. Spices: garlic, thyme, parsley, salt, pepper, and a habanero chili pepper. Instructions. Meat. First, wash the beef cubes with lime juice and then sauté them with onion, garlic, and herbs until the meat is seared. Then pour water over it and let it simmer slowly. Cook the pumpkin separately. Once the pumpkin is completely soft, take it out and blend it into a smooth puree. Pour the pumpkin puree into the pot with the cooked meat. Add the chopped potatoes, carrots, and cabbage, and about 10 minutes before the end, throw the pasta into the pot. The soup must be so thick that a spoon almost stands up in it. At the end, you can squeeze a bit more lime over it.